The history of South America is the study of the past, particularly the written record, oral histories, and traditions passed down from generation to generation on the continent of South America. South America has a history that has a wide range of human cultural and civilizational forms. While millennia of independent development were interrupted by the Portuguese and Spanish colonization drive of the late 15th century and the demographic collapse that followed, the continent's mestizo and indigenous cultures remain quite distinct from those of their colonizers. Through the transatlantic slave trade, South America became the home of millions of people in the African diaspora. The mixing of races led to new social structures. The tensions between colonial countries in Europe, indigenous peoples and escaped slaves shaped South America from the 16th through the 19th centuries. With the revolution for independence from the Spanish crown during the 19th century, South America underwent yet more social and political changes, among them nation-building projects, European immigration waves, increased trade, colonization of hinterlands, and wars about territory ownership and power balance, the reorganization of Indian rights and duties, liberal-conservative conflicts among the ruling class, and the subjugation of Indians living in the states' frontiers. That lasted until the early 1900s. Prehistory. In the Paleozoic era, South America and Africa were connected. By the end of the Mesozoic, South America was a massive biologically rich island. Over millions of years, the type of life living in South America became radically different than that of the rest of the world. Later on, South America connected with North America. This caused several migrations of tougher, North American mammal carnivores. The result was that hundreds of South American species became extinct. However, some species were able to adapt and spread into North America. These species include the giant sloths and the terror birds. Pre-Columbian era. Agriculture and domestication of animals. The Americas are thought to have been first inhabited by people crossing the Bering Land Bridge from Asia, which is now the Bering Strait. Over the course of millennia, people spread to all parts of the continent. The first evidence for the existence of agricultural practices in South America dates back to circa 6500 BCE, when potatoes, chilies and beans began to be cultivated for food in the Amazon basin. Pottery evidence further suggests that manioc, which remains a staple foodstuff today, was being cultivated as early as 2000 BCE. South American cultures began domesticating llamas and alpacas in the highlands of the Andes circa 3500 BCE. These animals were used for both transportation and meat. Guinea pigs were also domesticated as a food source at this time. By 2000 BCE, many agrarian village communities had been settled throughout the Andes and the surrounding regions. Fishing became a widespread practice along the coast, which helped to establish fish as a primary source of food. Irrigation systems were also developed at this time, which aided in the rise of an agrarian society. The food crops were quinoa, corn, lima beans, common beans, peanuts, manioc, sweet potatoes, oca and squashes. Cotton was also grown and was particularly important as the only major fiber crop. The earliest permanent settlement is proved by ceramic dating dates to 3500 BC by the Valdivia on the coast of Ecuador. Other groups also formed permanent settlements. Among those groups were the Chibchas and the Terana of Colombia, the Canary of Ecuador, the Quechuas of Peru, and the Aymaras of Bolivia were the three most important sedentary Indian groups in South America. In the last 2,000 years there may have been contact with Polynesians across the South Pacific Ocean, as shown by the spread of the sweet potato through some areas of the Pacific, but there is no genetic legacy of human contact. Canaris. The Canaris were the indigenous natives of today's Ecuadorian provinces of Cana and Azuay. They were an elaborate civilization with advanced architecture and religious belief. Most of their remains were either burned or destroyed from attacks by the Inca and later the Spaniards. Their old city, Guapondalig, was replaced twice, first by the Incan city of Tomafumba, and later by the colonial city of Cuenca. The city was also believed to be the site of El Dorado, the city of gold from the mythology of Colombia. The Canaris were most notable to have repelled the Incan invasion with fierce resistance for many years until they fell to Tupac Yupanqui. It is said that the Inca strategically married the Canary princes Paca to conquer the Canaris. Many of their descendants are still present in Cana, with a reasonable amount not having mixed and have been reserved from becoming mestizos. Chibchas. The Chibcha linguistic communities were the most numerous, the most territorially extended and the most socio-economically developed of the pre-Hispanic Colombian cultures. By the 3rd century CE, the Chibchas had established their civilization in the northern Andes. At one point, the Chibchas occupied part of what is now Panama and the high plains of the eastern Sierra of Colombia. The areas that they occupied were the departments of Santander, Norte de Santander, Boyacá and Cundinamarca, which were also the areas where the first farms were developed. Centuries later it was in the area of these departments where the independence movement originated and the first industries were developed. They are currently the richest areas in Colombia. They represented the most populous zone between the Mexica and Inca empires, next to the Quechua of Peru and Ecuador and the Aymara in Bolivia. The Chibchas of the eastern and northeastern highlands of Colombia were the most striking of the sedentary indigenous peoples in South America. In Colombia's eastern Sierra, the Chibchas were composed of several tribes who spoke the same language. Among them, Muiscas, Guanas, Laches and Chitariros. Amazon. For a long time, it was believed that Amazon forest dwellers were sparsely populated hunter-gatherer tribes. Archaeologist Betty J. Megas was a prominent proponent of this idea, as described in her book Amazonia, Man and Culture in a Counterfeit Paradise. However, recent archaeological findings have suggested that the region was actually densely populated. From the 1970s, numerous geoglyphs have been discovered on deforested land dating between 01250 AD, leading to claims about pre-Columbian civilizations. The BBC's Unnatural Histories claimed that the Amazon rainforest, rather than being a pristine wilderness, has been shaped by man for at least 11,000 years through practices such as forest gardening. The first European to travel the length of the Amazon River was Francisco de Orellana in 1542. The BBC documentary Unnatural Histories presents evidence that Francisco de Orellana, rather than exaggerating his claims as previously thought, was correct in his observations that an advanced civilization was flourishing along the Amazon in the 1540s. It is believed that the civilization was later devastated by the spread of diseases from Europe, such as smallpox. Some 5 million people may have lived in the Amazon region in 1500, divided between dense coastal settlements, such as that at Marajo, and inland dwellers. By 1900 the population had fallen to 1 million and by the early 1980s it was less than 200,000. One of the main pieces of evidence is the existence of the fertile terra preta, which is distributed over large areas in the Amazon forest. It is now widely accepted that these soils are a product of indigenous soil management. The development of this soil allowed agriculture and silviculture in the previously hostile environment, meaning that large portions of the Amazon rainforest are probably the result of centuries of human management, rather than naturally occurring as has previously been supposed. In the region of the Zinguanos tribe, remains of some of these large settlements in the middle of the Amazon forest were found in 2003 by Michael Heckenberger and colleagues of the University of Florida. Among those were evidence of roads, bridges and large plazas. Andean civilizations. Carol Super. The Carol Super civilization is among the oldest civilizations in the Americas, going back to 27th century BCE. It is noteworthy for having absolutely no signs of warfare. It was contemporary with urbanism's rise in Mesopotamia. Norte Chico on the north-central coast of present-day Peru. The Norte Chico civilization emerged around the time of Carol supercivilization. Chavin, the Chavin, a South American proliterate civilization, established a trade network and developed agriculture by 900 BCE. According to some estimates and archaeological finds, artifacts were found at a site called Chavin de Huántar in modern Peru at an elevation of 3,177 meters. Chavin civilization spanned 900 to 200 BCE. Moche. The Moche thrived on the north coast of Peru 2,000 to 1,500 years ago. The heritage of the Moche comes down to us through their elaborate burials, recently excavated by UCLA's Christopher B. Donnan in association with the National Geographic Society. Skilled artisans, the Moche were a technologically advanced people who traded with faraway peoples, like the Maya. Almost everything we know about the Moche comes from their ceramic pottery with carvings of their daily lives. We know from these records that they practiced human sacrifice, had blood-drinking rituals, and that their religion incorporated non-procreative sexual practices. Tiwanaku. The Tiwanaku were settled in Bolivia in around 400 BC, Inca holding their capital at the great puma-shaped city of Cuzco. The Inca civilization dominated the Andes region from 1438 to 1533. Known as Tawantinsuyu, or the Land of the Four Regions, in Quechua, the Inca civilization was highly distinct and developed. Inca rule extended to nearly 100 linguistic or ethnic communities, some 9 to 14 million people connected by a 25,000-kilometer road system. Cities were built with precise, unmatched stonework, constructed over many levels of mountain terrain. Terrace farming was a useful form of agriculture. There is evidence of excellent metalwork, and even successful skull surgery in Inca civilization. The Incas had no written language, but used quipu, a system of knotted strings, to record information. Arawak and Carib civilizations. The Arawak lived along the eastern coast of South America, as far south as what is now Brazil, and up into Guyana. When first encountered by Christopher Columbus, the Arawak were described as a peaceful people. Although the Arawak had already dominated other local groups such as the Saboni, the Arawak had, however, come under increasing military pressure from the Caribs, who are believed to have left the Orinoco River area to settle in the Caribbean. Over the century leading up to Columbus's arrival in the Caribbean archipelago in 1492, the Caribs are believed to have displaced many of the Arawaks who previously settled the island chains, and making inroads into what would now be modern Guyana. The Caribs were skilled boat builders and sailors, and owed their dominance in the Caribbean basin to their military skills. Cannibalism formed a key part of the Caribs' war rituals. The limbs of victims may have been taken home as trophies. It is not known how many indigenous peoples lived in Venezuela and Colombia before the Spanish conquest. It may have been approximately 1 million. Included groups such as the Awake, Carcatio, Maricha, and Timotocucus. The number was reduced after the conquest, mainly through the spread of new diseases from Europe. There were two main north-south axes of pre-Columbian population, producing maize in the west and manioc in the east. Large parts of the Llanos Plains were cultivated through a combination of slash-and-burn and permanent settled agriculture. European colonization. Before the arrival of Europeans, an estimated 30 million people lived in South America. Between 1452 and 1493, a series of papal bulls paved the way for the European colonization and Catholic missions in the New World, authorizing the ability of European Christian nations to take possession of non-Christian lands and encouraging the enslavement of the non-Christian people of Africa and the Americas. In 1494, Portugal and Spain, the two great maritime powers of that time, signed the Treaty of Tordesillas on the expectation of new lands being discovered in the west. Through the treaty they agreed that all the land outside Europe should be an exclusive duopoly between the two countries. The treaty established an imaginary line along a north-south meridian 370 leagues west of Cape Verde Islands, roughly 46 degrees 37 W. In terms of the treaty, all land to the west of the line would belong to Spain, and all land to the east, to Portugal. Because accurate measurements of longitude were not possible at that time, the line was not strictly enforced, resulting in a Portuguese expansion of Brazil across the meridian. In 1498, during his third voyage to the Americas, Christopher Columbus sailed near the Orinoco Delta and then landed in the Gulf of Paria. Amazed by the great offshore current of fresh water which deflected his course eastward, Columbus expressed in his moving letter to Isabella I and Ferdinand II that he must have reached heaven on earth. Great signs are these of the terrestrial paradise, for the sight conforms to the opinion of the holy and wise theologians whom I have mentioned, and likewise, the other signs conform very well, for I have never read or heard of such a large quantity of fresh water being inside and in such close proximity to salt water. The very mild temperateness also corroborates this, and if the water of which I speak does not proceed from paradise, then it is an even greater marvel, because I do not believe such a large and deep river has ever been known to exist in this world. Beginning in 1499, the people and natural resources of South America were repeatedly exploited by foreign conquistadors, first from Spain and later from Portugal. These competing colonial nations claimed the land and resources as their own and divided it into colonies. European diseases to which the native populations had no resistance were the overwhelming cause of the depopulation of the Native American population. Cruel systems of forced labor under Spanish control also contributed to depopulation. Following this, African slaves, who had developed immunity to these diseases, were quickly brought in to replace them. The Spaniards were committed to converting their American subjects to Christianity and were quick to purge any native cultural practices that hindered this end. However, most initial attempts at this were only partially successful. American groups simply blended Catholicism with their traditional beliefs. The Spaniards did not impose their language to the degree they did their religion. In fact, the missionary work of the Roman Catholic Church in Quechua, Nahuatl, and Guarani actually contributed to the expansion of these American languages, equipping them with writing systems. Eventually the natives and the Spaniards interbred, forming a mestizo class. Mestizos and the Native Americans were often forced to pay unfair taxes to the Spanish government and were punished harshly for disobeying their laws. Many native artworks were considered pagan idols and destroyed by Spanish explorers. This included a great number of gold and silver sculptures, which were melted down before transport to Europe. 17th and 18th centuries. In 1616, the Dutch, attracted by the legend of El Dorado, founded a fort in Guiana and established 3 colonies, Demerara, Berbiche, and Essequibo. In 1624 France attempted to settle in the area of modern-day French Guiana, but was forced to abandon it in the face of hostility from the Portuguese, who viewed it as a violation of the Treaty of Tordesillas. However, French settlers returned in 1630 and in 1643 managed to establish a settlement at Cayambe along with some small-scale plantations. Since the 16th century there were some movements of discontent to Spanish and Portuguese colonial system. Among these movements, the most famous being that of the Maroons, slaves who escaped their masters and in the shelter of the forest communities organized free communities. Attempts to subject them by the Royal Army was unsuccessful, because the Maroons had learned to master the South American jungles. In a royal decree of 1713, the king gave legality to the first free population of the continent, Palenque de San Basilio in Colombia today, led by Bencos Bioho. Brazil saw the formation of a genuine African kingdom on their soil, with the Quilombo of Palmares. Between 1721 and 1735, the revolt of the Comuneros of Paraguay arose, because of clashes between the Paraguayan settlers and the Jesuits, who ran the large and prosperous Jesuit reductions and controlled a large number of Christianized Indians. Between 1742 and 1756, was the insurrection of Juan Santos Atahualpa in the central jungle of Peru. In 1780, the Viceroyalty of Peru was met with the insurrection of Curas Condor Conqui or Tupac Amaru II, which would be continued by Tupac Katari in Upper Peru. In 1763, the African Cuffy led a revolt in Guyana which was bloodily suppressed by the Dutch. In 1781, the revolt of the Comuneros, an insurrection of the villages in the Viceroyalty of New Granada, was a popular revolution that united indigenous people and mestizos. The villages tried to be the colonial power and despite the capitulation were signed, the Viceroy Manuel Antonio Flores did not comply, and instead ran to the main leaders José Antonio Galán. In 1796, Essequibo of the Dutch was taken by the British, who had previously begun a massive introduction of slaves. During the 18th century, the figure of the priest, mathematician and botanist José Celestino Mutis was delegated by the Viceroy Antonio Caballero y Góngora to conduct an inventory of the nature of the Nueva Granada, which became known as the Botanical Expedition, which classified plants, wildlife and founded the first astronomical observatory in the city of Santa Fe de Bogotá. On August 15, 1801, the Prussian scientist Alexander von Humboldt reached Fontibon where Mutis, and began his expedition to New Granada, Quito. The meeting between the two scholars are considered the brightest spot of the botanical expedition. Humboldt also visited Venezuela, Mexico, United States, Chile, and Peru. His observations of temperature differences between the Pacific Ocean between Chile and Peru in different periods of the year. He discovered the cold currents moving from south to north up the coast of Peru, which was named in his honor the Humboldt Current. Between 1806 and 1807, British military forces tried to invade the area of the Rio de la Plata, at the command of Home Riggs Popham and William Carr Beresford, and John Whitelock. The invasions were repelled, but powerfully affected the Spanish authority.